And good morning, good evening in these 2 weeks of time zone weirdness when some parts of the world have abandoned daylight savings time and no one else has. If you have made it here with us today, all the panelists also have. Congratulations, you're already doing really great and better than I did earlier this week. So you can be really proud of yourself. I'm Lena Reinhardt. I'm very excited to be your host today for this panel about strengthening the relationship between security, product, and engineering teams. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Fronteg. The webinar will be around 45 minutes long, and after this time, both the panelists and myself will be in the lead dev Slack to answer some of the questions that you have in the #EffectiveTeams channel. We will also make sure to reserve some time at the end of after our main discussion today to answer some questions live. So throughout the panel, I'd love for all of you to submit as many questions as you have through the Q&A channel here in Zoom, and we'll get to them towards the end so you can hear some of our panelists' live and unfiltered opinions. So I'd like to get us started with some introduction. My name is Lena Reinhardt, and today I'm joined by 3 panelists that I'd love to introduce themselves. I have asked all of them to also, in addition to their background, share the thing that they either like or dislike the most about their area of expertise. So that said, Racine, do you want to get us started?
Hi, I'm Racine Harris. I'm a senior product manager at Smartsheet based in the United States. And I work in product. And the thing that I love most about it is being able to kind of take a problem that someone is having, think of a way to solve it, and make that thing and see if it actually does what you thought it was going to do. That's been the theme throughout my career in both product and before that in healthcare. But I think the fun part is finding creative ways to solve a problem and then checking yourself to see if it actually does once you put that thing out in the world.
Nice, thank you. Well, I look forward to hearing how you've creatively solved the problem of collaboration between product and other parts of the company. Aviad, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Aviad. I'm the CTO and one of the founders of Fronteg. Fronteg is an identity platform built for developers. And that's, I think, what I really like about my position. I'm able to develop and build stuff for me on the other side. I'm an engineer for more than 20 years now. So this is what I like most about my job. And you know what? This is what I hate about my job because developers are probably the most difficult customers to build stuff for because when they are happy, you are happy and you feel that you nailed it, but they can be a very harsh customer. So that's that's the 2 sides of the coin over there.
I can imagine. I love the ambiguity of that. Thank you, Aviad. Izar.
So I'm Izar Tarandash. I'm a senior principal security architect at SiriusXM. And the thing that I like the most about my job is that I have heard people scream, "Are you crazy? Go away," in at least 12 different languages. So
you want to finish that sentence or are we just going to leave it on the so?
No, that's so, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm just going to leave that as is and move on.
It's a perfect segue into what we're going to talk today. So
exactly. No, it's a great setup, honestly. I appreciate it. And so, yeah, my name is Lena Reinhardt. I have been an engineering leader for many years now in roles like VP engineering at Travis CI and Circle CI and a software as a service startup co-founder and CEO. And now I coach and consult and organizational develop with a lot of organizations. And the thing I like and dislike most about my job is that most organizations deal with all the same challenges and patterns, and that's reassuring, but at the same time, sometimes also frustrating because it's just hard to break out of those. And on that note, one of the challenges that I have dealt with is the one that we're talking about today, which is the partnership and collaboration between product engineering and security teams. As a warning for everyone here with us, we did have a very vivid and spicy discussion in the preparation panel. We had a call already to talk about the topics and the great expertise that everyone brings who's here with me today. I love their different perspectives. One thing that we did agree on is that we might have to cut off people at some point. So if you see me interrupting people, please know that that was agreed upon beforehand. But at the same time, I just want to get the discussion started because we don't have a lot of time and you don't have to just hear me rambling. So there's a lot of opinions and we'll cover basically two big questions today. The one is essentially what challenges that all our experts have experienced in their work between product security engineering teams, and then the approaches that they found help either solve this or make it better or make it more effective and efficient. And so I want to start with the first question to all of you. In your experience, and by the way, to everyone listening, put your questions into the Q&A channel. I'm going to keep mentioning that a couple more times. In your experience, the three of you, what are the biggest sources of friction in the collaboration between product engineering and security teams?
I'm happy to dive in first from a product perspective. A lot of the friction, I think, comes from two things. It's one, not knowing what you need security for and when you need to do your checks. So a lot of times we're thinking about a brilliant way to solve a problem and we're going to just go and build that. And we kind of forgot that we need to go check that with a few people. And it's because security kind of lives outside of the product, it feels sometimes. So what has worked is really integrating that team, understanding what types of changes require a security check, and then making that a part of like your definition of ready or definition of done. But you have to get to the point where you really recognize that security is like an integral part of the work that you do. And it is everyone's responsibility, not just the security team that you may or may not engage with, once a year. Really making it a part of like understanding that product teams are responsible for security, just like the security team.
Yeah, I'll maybe add on that, I always say that security and product and UX kind of contradicts. So, UX kind of hates the security, side of that, and security kind of hates the UX side because, you're building a login screen, right? And these are the questions that I face like on a daily basis. You're building a login screen, the security people would say, let's add 2 forms of MFA in order to make sure that the user is actually who they claim they are. While the product says, let's get them on the form as quick as we can, right? Now, who's right, right? If we're gonna take the product, example, and we're gonna be hacked. I mean, who cares about how fast they got onboarded if their details are out there? But the security, every question or every other step that you add on the sign up will reduce, conversion. So, who is it that you're gonna take the advice on? So these are kind of the questions that we see on every day, and that's just on product, right? And that's kind of the basis of that.
So basically, like that. A lot of security measures basically introduce friction that is kind of detrimental or even counter to the goals that product teams are pursuing.
Because it will always kind of go one against each other because, the product people will always challenge every security measure that we want to add to the product. Why do we need that extra? Why do we need to send an email to make sure that the user is actually who they claim they are when they're trying to delete their environment? They want to delete their environment. Let them delete their environment. While the security say, you should say thank you that I'm only introducing one step up question and not 3 other. Let's add an approval cycle of having another one approving that, and that's kind of the kind of balance that we want to do.
I love Aviad's example of the login and the discussion around building it. And I'm going to take it into a bit of a different direction, just bringing together that example and what Racine mentioned. I don't think that it's a matter of not knowing that security is needed. I think the developers nowadays do know that there is this thing called security. But there's a difference not only in language, but there's a huge difference in objectives. Developers look at security today as a speed bump on their way to success. They want to push features out as quick as possible, right? And security is constantly pulling them back, pulling them back, pulling them back. So developers, they move at the speed of innovation. They want to do the new shiny thing as quick as possible. And security moves at the speed of caution. We want to let them do that, but at the same time, we don't want to let the barn open and let all the dogs and the horses out and let whatever happens happen, right? And I think that in that dialogue, as long as we don't speak the same language around this thing called risk, and we keep with this mindset that security wants risk to be represented as high as possible so that people actually act on it, and developers want the risk to be as low as possible so that they can leave it aside and go do another shiny thing. Until we solve that problem, I don't think that we're going to actually close that gap as we should.
I love the points you all made so far. I kind of want to call out, because it sounds to me there are a couple of themes in there. And I'd love to hear if there are others that you want to add to the list. Like one bit that I've heard is essentially just in objectives being kind of misaligned, and incentives between, like, for example, security and engineering and product teams, between, like, pushing features out quickly, and then also with that coming kind of operationalizing or operational challenges, like, security teams. I love the speed of caution that they move at, as you called it, Isa. Whereas, like, developers are often really encouraged to move super fast, push things out quickly, and then they even, like, test in production or things like that. They kind of take those things even further. And that there's also lack of common language in terms of how, like, risks and how we talk about them. Like, those are some of the aspects I've heard so far. What else have you all seen as challenges or sources of friction?
I want to add another aspect of that, and that's, we are building products and we are building, engineering teams and security to serve eventually the business aspect of the company, right? And it's most of the cases, and this is why I say, when you're dealing with big companies, your buyer is not who you claim they are. Your buyer is the security team and the CISO. And they'll present the security questionnaire you have to comply with. And that kind of pushes everything out the table, because you have a 6-figure deal or 7-figure deal on the table that you have to comply with. And that kind of changes roadmap, and that frustrates product manager, that frustrates, VP of engineering, because they want to deal with scale. Product managers, they want to deal with innovation. And then comes the security team, or this, I would say even more, comes the VP of sales or the CRO and says, listen, guys, we need to close this deal. And the security team says that we are missing these kind of features. So how are we going to deal with that? So that's another aspect that brings business. You need security in order to close business.
And that's, I think, one of the foundational things that I've often run into is the question that, like, who ultimately actually owns security? Like, and it feels like a very basic thing to say, but at the same time, I know it's not. Like, in my experience, there is the organizational structure aspect. Like, basically any teams I've worked with, from startups that have probably more than 20 developers, at some point you very soon have at least one person whose dedicated job role entails some sort of security title. At some point you may have a department or at least a team or two. There's, of course, a compliance that is very close to that idea that I think mentioned. There is oftentimes sort of operational IT aspect that kind of gets very close to it as well. Maybe you even have a CIO, like chief information officer or chief security officer, even, that there's some representation at C-level. But there is, like, often I find that question isn't really answered well, where there is some expertise in the organization that's in a central spot in that team or department. But then, especially in teams that have some resemblance of DevOps culture, it's like, well, yeah, it's already kind of come up a bit as well. It's like, yeah, developers kind of are thinking about this, or they have it on their minds, or they know it's important, which I would agree with. But then the ownership gets very murky, and that's where things around, again, misaligned incentives become really tricky. Because then, like, yeah, do do you really push for the developers to push things out, like the new features, and iterate really quickly and whatnot? And do you just have your security team there to basically pick up the pieces when things fall apart and you have an incident? Like, I honestly see a lot of organizations that are kind of set up that way, and of course not on purpose, but it's kind of what happens. Like, what's your experiences there?
So you put a lot of stuff on the table, and I would love to approach each one individually. But I think that if we go one level up, most of the things that you mentioned, they are actually artifacts and mechanisms that were built in because security is something that's lacking as a rule. Now, one thought experiment that I like to make. Take your typical developer, okay? The way that they do their job, the way that they interview for new jobs. Now, substitute the word security for the word performance. Do you have a department of performance? Do you have performance guidelines? Do you have a performance questionnaire? No, because developers are expected to have performance as part of their toolbox, right? You come into an interview for a developer post, you are asked to sort numbers in the most well-performing way. Not many people ask you, hey, is your code secure, and how would you make it secure? Now, if that was something that's part of the toolbox of a developer, then half of the mechanisms that Lena just listed would fall apart. The need for the security questionnaire that Aviad put on the table would fall apart. Why? Because governance would be less of a thing because we have less of the problems of security. So I understand that, and you know what? I'm even going to go with a crazy opinion. Security questionnaires, like what Aviad mentioned, sometimes they are just security theater, because even the side that's asking the question doesn't know how to interpret the answer, or doesn't get enough data to make an assumption on what's the level of risk that the person that's answering is carrying. But we need those things because we need to put them aside on a file, because one day one lawyer can come and say, oh, you didn't do your due diligence, so that breach, it's on you, right? But I think that at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say here is that where I think that the most friction exists between developers and security is in, on one side, the lack of security education when creating a developer, and on the other side, the lack of, I don't want to say the lack of interest, but perhaps the lack of time and effort investment from the developer side in learning and applying security.
Isar, you brought up a really great point, and I'm curious about, like, how do you make this more, like, performance is something that's just expected with developers. And as a PM, I understand that that's important for our product. So I'm never going to push back when we need to think about how to make something more performant or to make sure we're building in a performant way, right? How do you go from this thought that security really is about, like, making sure we don't get sued? And so let's just do the thing that we need to do to make sure we don't get sued, versus it is a part of our practice and we want to build a product with integrity, and security is a part of that integrity. How do you think people go make that change? Or sorry, Lena.
No, I was just gonna pause, Isar, because I love the question. I wrote it down. Racine, I think that's a really good one. And Isar, I want to hear your answer. Because I think it's critical in this. Before we go there, I did just briefly want to call out the, I think, distinction with what you called security theater versus Racine, for example. What I heard from you is like it's crucial. Security is crucial to the integrity of our product. It sounds to me, and would map with my experience at least, like both are kind of important. There is the quote unquote security theater where like your customers have questionnaires, compliance like requirements and whatnot, and so does your business. And even though you may have opinions on which of those things are kind of actually important versus not, those things still need to happen. Like, does that, to the security theater point, are we in agreement on that, or do any of you kind of disagree with my big statement about this? I kind of just want to distinguish a little bit between essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about security, as much as it's possible to define that in a relatively short time.
I think that the answer to that distinction is in the backend operation, right? because security theater is theater for the sake of security, of security for the sake of security, right? So I'm asking Aviad before I buy his product to fill this huge questionnaire in Excel of all things, right? And then I go line by line and I start grilling him. Do you have your SOC report? When was the last time that you had a breach? Do you have this and that cipher, but not that other one in your endpoints, right?
What is
So
your
at the end of the day,
management looks like? Yeah, that's the most common one.
Mhm. Also, the software
Right.
development process documentation.
Yeah,
exactly.
When do you
And
spend your
above.
software? Yeah, how the CI/CD looks like, etc.
But then comes the question, what do I do with those answers, right? So if I
Yes.
am equipped to actually look at that risk, those answers, and decide that this is the level of risk that he is carrying, so I am ready to give him my data, that's valid. But if I'm just going to file that away and say, hey, it's governance, then I just wasted his time, my time, did not protect anything. And again, I'm a speed bump on the way to innovation. So that's how I define security theater.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I
Now-
just want to add one thing is on that. In around 95, I would say maybe percent of questions on the security questionnaire, you're 100% right. These are just questions, in order to fulfill the positions on the other side, right? You have a security team of 10 people. They need to get it, they are waking up in the morning. They are not writing code. They're writing security questionnaires and they are, and that's okay. That's the game we all live by. But in 5% of the cases, that would be a viable security questionnaires or security
Yes.
question that affect the way your
Yes.
product behaves.
Mhm.
Yes.
And, in some of the cases, it will be if a security team member will go over the security questions and will say, I'm totally fine with that. That they, as part of the CI/CD, they scan only with one engine and not 5. That's okay. And they have only one penetration test every year and not 4. And they don't have a bug bounty program. That's okay. But if they are not encrypting their password, or they don't have MFA, or they are not supporting SSO, that's a non-starter for us.
Mhm.
That is true.
Now, these questions will hide there on the security questionnaire under a pile of, just
exactly
checkboxes.
Checkbox stuff. Yep.
But these questions are the one that really matters.
Yep.
And that one will affect Racine's job by pushing out items of innovation from the table and saying, we need to nail this deal
First.
Push everything from the roadmap and develop that.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. I love
Totally.
that. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for entertaining the stark, crass question. Appreciate that. And I do want to.
It was a great question.
Thank you. Well, I do want to basically, for the purpose of kind of the rest of this conversation, I would love to kind of go from what I heard from all of you in some shape or form, which is basically like we view security as a practice that should somewhat be part of kind of all our jobs. There is a question, of course, to what degree, and it should also be part of the jobs of the engineers that are working in our organizations, including the ones who don't have a quote unquote security title. And like it is an important part of running a business. And the question is like, how do you make that work in the kind of tensions and settings that we've heard so far? Does that work for the three of you?
Yeah, I just want
to,
at some point, we're going to need to go back to Racine's question on how to make it as part of, because eventually the security, it's all about security culture.
Yeah. And that is perfect, because that's the question I did just want to pivot to as well, because it was an excellent question. Thank you, Racine. And sorry for parking that earlier. So I'm going to try and do your phrasing justice. Please correct me if I got it wrong, Racine. So what I heard was you picked up what Izar mentioned earlier in terms of like comparing security with performance, where like all engineers generally, maybe I'm going to broaden to everyone in the organization, should like perform in their jobs. Security should just be a part of that. How do you go from that idea to actually the practice? Like, how do you make security a part of how everyone in your organization works?
Yeah,
Racine?
that's definitely my question. I think I've seen it more at the forefront in companies where we're working with privileged data. So when I work for like a healthcare startup, obviously it's in your face and we all have to care about it because there's so many rules and regulations and all of that. When I moved to SaaS companies where I'm focused on productivity tools, it's a part of it, but it is, I can count the number of conversations I've had about security in the last year. And I'll just leave it at that because I obviously work for a company, but like, you know, it's not the same. And so it shouldn't be, though, just reserved for you work with banking information or healthcare data. It really is important to our customers. So how do we make that trickle down so that literally it's a shared responsibility across the organization?
So I want to ask a question here, you know, and to piggyback with a question. How many organizations do you know that do not have PR as part of, you know, pushing a code like pull request or code review? Because it's not existent anymore, right?
I know some, unfortunately.
Unfortunately,
So you can share,
but a very, very small number.
Yeah, like I can't think of any.
Because it kind of became like, you know, you have to go, and by the way, SOC, right? You have to go to a SOC compliance. SOC requires you to have a code review as part of the product.
Right.
And it requires you to have a link between, you know, the code that you are pushing to a Jira ticket or whatever, you know, task management that you are using. So, and that's because for developers, it's kind of, you know, goes without saying that you're pushing code, someone had to review it in sensitive repositories. There are 2 reviewers or 3 reviewers and feature flags around it so you can go back, etc. And as you know, in the product lifecycle, I would say, on the product definition lifecycle, right? There is the part of a discovery, and then there is a part of you know, setting up a PRD and going to design, etc. And when we're trying to close the loop with the developers, we kind of skipping on the security reviews. Mm-hmm. And this is why I say it's a culture, because a company that has code reviews as part of their culture, or you know, security training as part of the culture, will have security reviews on features, and we'll have dedicated security teams testing out the feature, you know, before it goes out to production. So it's a matter of culture. By the way, in most of the cases, will be determined by the VP of engineering. Because if they come from a security team, this is based off my experience, and you know, I'm only 42. So, you know, it will be based off someone that came with a security background, and they'll say, let's change the process here and let's create a culture of caring about security and not caring only about code quality or performance or UX.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would second that as a former VP engineering. The bit that I thought was really important here is like the culture part. Like the definition I use for culture is culture is the behaviors we reward and punish. And I think that's what a lot of it boils down to. And I think the examples you gave were great. Like, yeah, do you have any kind of checks and balances? Like literally, is it not possible, for example, to push things out before code has been reviewed? Like security is one part of that. What other cultural kind of aspects have you seen work? I think, Isar, you were going to already add something to this as well.
So here's the thing. I would love to live in the world that Aviad is mentioning. I would just love to. And I've seen that world. It exists. It's out there. The problem is that most places cannot achieve that kind of security operations maturity, right? So on the sense of culture, first of all, we already established that we have a problem with language. We have a problem with objectives. So how do we close that gap? In the beginning of my career, I was working in a company that made large systems for large customers. So most of the top banks, most of the top sellers, stuff like that. And my main motivator when going to teams and explaining what I needed from them was code the system as if your grandma's economies are going to be stored there, because chances are that they will. And that was a motivator to them. Bring the functionality of the system that they were working on closer to the reality that they live. But that's not enough, because at the end of the day, what I'm asking from them is a huge amount of work. And I am the first one to recognize that, right? On the other hand, they are constantly asking me to do things, and I, as a security person, as we are known, the Department of No, we start every answer by no. Over time, I learned that the way to reach into security, into developers and actually get a dialogue with them is instead of no, to say yes, but. And the heart of the thing here lives on the but. What is it that I'm asking of them to do the thing that they want to do, but differently? So a lot of my practice over the years has been focused exactly on how do I close this gap between security and developers. Something that I have focused on a lot of my time is a practice called threat modeling. Threat modeling, if you reduce it to like its minimal components, we have what's called the 4 questions framework, Adam Shostak. And the 4 questions are, what are we building? What could go wrong? What can we do about it? And did we do a good job? So what are we building is something that developers will be able to answer much better than me as a security person, because I don't see the angles that you guys see, and I don't know what you're working on day to day. What can we do about things that go wrong? Developers should be able to tell me, hey, the thing that you're proposing is doable or not. Did we do a good job? Let's leave that one aside completely, because it's the feedback loop on the process. But then we have the second question, what could go wrong? And that's where we as security people find the biggest chasm with developers. A lot of people like to say, oh, just think like a hacker. If you come to me, put me in the kitchen and say, think like a chef, I hope that you're ordering pizza already, because I don't know the tools, I don't know the mechanisms, I don't know the techniques. I'm not going to come out with anything, and I can think like a chef until tomorrow morning. Nothing's going to happen, right? So to come to a developer and say, now think like a hacker, look at this thing that you're building and tell me how it can break. If they were able to answer that to me in the first place, I wouldn't have to ask, right? So that's not the right approach. The right approach, in my opinion, and fortunately, a lot of people are starting to agree, is that if we go and take security in the direction of the developer, putting it in the language that the developer speaks. So if you look at a user story, you can come out with an abuse story, right? So if I have that login screen that Aviad used as an example, hey, I want to be able to do multiple factor authentication without breaking the flow of the thing. I just gave something that is security, something that's tangible, something that gives me what I want and lets them develop it the way that they want, right? So I stopped talking security. I'm now talking developer language. On the other hand, if I can, as part of that dialogue, infuse them with the principles of security, for example, something that's very basic, but that bites us in the behind every day, do not accept uncontrolled input. Basically, it means if it doesn't come from you or from something that you wrote, don't trust it. Something very basic, right? We do it in our lives the whole day. Somebody, hopefully, sends you an email saying, hey, I'm a prince and I need $5,000, right? You're not going to be sending them $5,000 because you don't know where it came from. It's uncontrolled input. So we want developers to go, who hasn't ever, right? So we want developers to develop that feeling for the things that shouldn't happen in the first place, and then incorporate that into the way that they work, and then translate that into the security requirements that we have. Mm-hmm. At the same time, as security people, and sorry for the rambling, we're trying to develop guardrails that I can give to a developer and say, this is the new thing that you're developing. First of all, look at these guardrails. I would like you want a database, great. I want you to use this particular database if possible. I would like for you to have these settings. I would like the access control to happen this way. If there is something in these guardrails that doesn't match the thing that you're building or that is limiting you in some way, let's talk about that specific thing. Rather than you going and building your thing, and I'm going to run around you and say, no, now that you build, stop it. You can't ship it because security.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Racine? Sort of, I
Um,
hope.
It does. It does.
So I
Big
do,
rant, sorry.
I do briefly just want to mention we haven't gotten any questions in the Q&A channel so far. So if you're here and you have a question for one of the fantastic panelists here, please share it. In the meantime, I'll ask more questions about how you've seen this work. So Izar, what I've heard from you, and I love the details you went into, it was one bit basically kind of consulting the engineering teams in the sense of like working with them, like helping them kind of view things from a security point of view, asking pointed questions in that direction. There's also an educational component in that, and then hopefully helping them kind of, understand more how to think like a hacker over time. And also a bit, at least being able to ask some questions in that direction. And there is also a bit, from the sounds that you mentioned, guidelines, guardrails, that are more towards like processes. I would love to hear a bit more, like Racine, from a product perspective. What have you seen work in terms of, the kind of integration of kind of thinking security as part of it, or what other things have you seen work so far?
Yeah, I think picking up on what Izar said, part of what came to mind for me was like, and then there has to be a roadshow about the importance of all of this to our leaders, because one part of this that goes missing is, we all have our own incentives that as we talked about at the beginning of the call. My job is to get something that's really user friendly out. Developers are supposed to get it out fast. And then we've got these speed bumps. And without the right cultural like understanding of the importance, someone can say speed bump is not that important. It is more important to get this to market, and we'll worry about that later. We'll go put the chocolate chips in the muffin like after it's been baked, which is not easy, and we know that. But the incentive is to go forward and to move and to put something out in the market. And so I think what I have seen, like you said, I think Aviat said it, was around having a leader who actually understands the importance of security. And that doesn't mean that they had to have worked in it before, but I think that they have to have been taught it. And so sometimes it means that like we need a little security roadshow where they go and make their case to leaders so that we're making room for those things. In the product development lifecycle, we have to make room for a lot of stuff. We have to make room for refinement after we put something out. Security is something that we really have to be able to say, it's okay to make room for. And if it's going to slow down development a little bit so that we're building the right product with the right integrity, then, that's a trade-off we're willing to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to... Yes, sorry. So I really like what Izar said on it's all about communication. And I really think that a healthy organization is all about communication, right? So if in order to talk, to kind of get to the heart of a developer, but in order to build the right security measures, you need to talk in his language. I'll piggyback on what Racine just said, and getting the leadership and the executive leaders to understand the importance of security. You have kind of, you cannot speak the same language that you would speak with a developer. You need to translate it into business measures.
Dollars and cents,
but
and why this matters for the business.
But I'll just add one caveat before that. Racine had mentioned that working on a healthcare industry and then on other industries, and the amount of the profile that security had in there. The fact is that I completely agree with you guys that we security people have to go and talk to the business, right? But a very important thing that connects to what Racine said is that the business, first of all, has to tell us security people what is the level of risk that they are willing to take on, because that's going to calibrate the amount of things that we are going to ask product to do.
Yeah.
That
Right.
makes sense.
There is such a thing as too much security.
Yeah. And I think the business decisions are a really important point. Just on a practical level, I've made really positive experiences with having guidelines set, investment guidelines for the business or for the engineering team overall, where you define, for example, 60% features, 30% maintenance, security investments, for example, tech debt, 10% escalations. As an example, those guidelines can change, but having that for the organization can be really helpful. It also may go in the direction, like we got one question from Helen that I'd love very quick answers from all of you, because we unfortunately only have 3 minutes left. But if any of you have more questions, put them into the Effective Teams Slack channel. Helen's question, thank you for that, is how would you tackle your security debt ballooning without having the opportunity to modify the size of the team, especially if your product is very mature, say over 10 years old?
Can I
Racine,
jump
do you
into
want to
that
go
one?
first? Oh, sorry.
No. Racine, go first.
You know, I'm all about looking at the backlog and figuring out which things are still relevant and which aren't. I've been known to walk into teams with, 4-year-old bugs. Is that still a bug? Is that still a thing? Wipe it off. But it also means making room. And so it really is having frank discussions about what we are going to accomplish as a team on our quarterly basis or whatever. I have to also make room and make time for technical investments. So similar to what Lena was saying around like having guidelines and principles around how we spend our time as a team. Yes, 60% can be on feature work, 30% is on technical investments. If all 30% needs to be on security to get us out of the hole, then that might be the call that we have to make. Or it may mean that in some quarters we shift down from feature investment. I think it really depends on where we are, and all having that shared understanding of like the consequence of not acting and then communicating that out.
Yeah, I'll add on that. 10 years ago, especially when we're talking about mature products, right? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was when I started coding professionally. It was all about, that there were no like SaaS products or tools. You would have, if you needed something, you would have to build it in-house. But today, I mean, building software can be kind of a mix and match of APIs where you just focus on your kind of product differentiation and your algorithms and your data. And especially if you have a very mature product, maybe, now is the time to kind of go and scan around the market and to see if you can migrate some of this, painful, homegrown, mature technology that you have to a more modern APIs out there. While you can, if you can allow yourself without expanding the team to kind of pour money on the problem, while you can make business out of pouring money on the problem, that kind of a win-win situation, as I see it.
Yeah. Isar, you get 60 seconds if you want to add anything to it, because I love the two experiences.
So, I'm going to horribly plug in here something and say threat modeling is the answer, right? So that's where you begin and where you're going to close the loop at the end when you do the testing. Having a product that is mature, that sometimes translates to, we have parts in the product that the guy who wrote it in C and C++ left the company 8 years ago, can mean that you have a lot of risk that you've been carrying for a long time and that you may fail to understand. So the process of threat modeling is going to help you put that system into context in terms of the risks that you are dealing with today against the risks that existed when the system was written. And sometimes, although Aviad's advice is totally on point, and that's definitely something that you have to do, sometimes you can go around those issues by perhaps putting things around the system that weren't in place 10 years ago that today will help you. So, change the crypto, put some firewall in here and there, put the whole thing in a Dockerized environment, close it somewhere away, throw it out of the window because somebody wrote a much better version, right? But first of all, put the thing into context and understand where it sits in terms of its own security today, not 10 years ago.
That's a good one.
Thank you. Yeah. And thank you to all of you. I really loved hearing your brilliant expertise. Thank you for the great insight. We heard today how to go from security being your department of no to at least your department of yes, but how there's a lot of trickiness in the collaboration between product and engineering and security teams. But I love the examples that all of you shared on making that collaboration work, like making security as part of your culture, trying to get some chocolate chips into the muffin before it's baked, by having engineers that understand that security is a part of their job, and so should it be for leaders and people across your entire organization. Like, make room for these investments. Make a business decision about how much risk you're willing to accept, because that's going to make a lot of things much easier in deciding how you're going to make security work in your organization. And thank you to Helen again for your answer, for your question. I love the answers from the three of you. So yeah, thank you to Aviad, Racine, and Isar. It was fantastic to have you today. For anyone who's interested, head over to the Effective Teams Slack channel in the Lead Dev Slack to, if you have further questions, we're happy to continue the discussion there. And thank you for joining, and we hope to see you next time.